Good morning, everyone. May I have your attention, please? We are really excited to have you with us. We are excited to announce that the event will start very soon. Could we please kindly you to please take your seat inside the Suhana Hall. We are looking forward to have a great discussion with all of you. Thank you very much. Welcome everybody. It is now time to take your seats. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Bapak dan Ibu. Welcome to the launch of the World Bank's Indonesia Economic Prospects Report, June 2025. People First Housing, a roadmap from homes to jobs to prosperity in Indonesia. My name is Enda. I am with the World Bank team that brought you this report. And it is my pleasure to be your MC for today's event. I would like to welcome all of you who are here at Suhana Hall and those who are joining virtually. We are really excited to have you with us. First, a note on language options. For our online participants connecting through Zoom, please note that you may switch to Bahasa Indonesia or English interpreters using buttons at the bottom of your screen. You can switch language during any part of the event. For participants here with us in Suhana Hall, interpreter devices are available at the back of the hall. Bagi peserta yang bergabung secara virtual lewat Zoom, Anda bisa memilih fitur penerjemah di bagian bawah layar Anda dan memilih Bahasa Indonesia. Bagi Anda yang berada di Suhana Hall, apabila diperlukan, alat penerjemah tersedia di bagian belakang ruangan ini. Let me begin with a brief rundown of today's proceedings. We will start the event with opening remarks from Ibu Carolyn Turk, World Bank Country Director for Indonesia and Timor-Leste. A welcome address will follow and to be delivered by Ibu Gita Kamath, Deputy Head of Mission, Australian Embassy for Indonesia. For today's keynote speech, Bapak Agus Harimurti Yudhoyono, the Coordinating Minister of Infrastructure and Regional Development, will deliver his remarks. Next, we move to two presentations, focused on the report's content. First, a presentation on macroeconomic development and outlook by Bapak Habib, World Bank lead economist for Indonesia and Timor-Leste. Second, a presentation on People First Housing, a roadmap from homes to jobs to prosperity in Indonesia by Bapak Luis Triveno, Senior Urban Development Specialist, World Bank Indonesia. And for the final set piece of today's event, we will have our panel discussion joined by an esteemed line of guests. Bapak Fahri Hamzah, Vice Minister of Housing and Settlement, Ministry of Housing and Settlement. Bapak Abdul Malik Sadat Idris, Deputy of Infrastructure, Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas. Ibu Wendy Haryanto, Executive Director of Jakarta Property Institute. And Bapak Joko Suranto, Chairman of Indonesia Real Estate Association. This session will be moderated by Bapak Bjorn Philip, Manager in the East Asia of the World Bank. Moreover, we invite you to follow the X account of World Bank Indonesia at Bank Dunia. To join the conversation around this report on social media, please use the following hashtag. Hashtag @BankDunia. Hashtag IEP Bank Dunia. Today's IEP report can be downloaded through our website. Please visit worldbank.org/IEP to download it. Ladies and gentlemen, proceedings will now commence with opening remarks from Ibu Carolyn Turk, World Bank Country Director for Indonesia and Timor-Leste. Ibu Carrie, the stage is yours.
Wow, it's quite bright up here. Thank you, Ibu. Selamat pagi dan selamat datang. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all here today to the launch of the June 2025 edition of the Indonesia Economic Prospects Report. I'd like to start by just acknowledging our distinguished speakers today. Pa Agus Yudhoyono, who is going to join us by video with a pre-recorded message. Ibu Gita Kamath from the Australian Embassy in Indonesia. Pa Fahri from the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Housing. I believe we will be joined by Pa Abdul from Bapenas, the Deputy for Infrastructure. Ibu Diska, Putri Pamungkas, who's the expert staff from the Coordinating Ministry for Infrastructure and Regional Development. Ibu Wendy Haryanto, thank you for joining us from the Jakarta Property Institute. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Pa Joko Suranto, Chairman of the Indonesia Real Estate Association. Let me just start off with a note of thanks to Australia's Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade for their continued support of the World Bank's analytical work in Indonesia. Ibu Gita, thank you very much. So the global economy is facing really substantial headwinds. These emanate largely from heightened trade tensions, global policy uncertainty, and geopolitical risks, which have, of course, become elevated over the weekend. And the World Bank's Global Economic Prospects, which we released, I think, a week or two ago, has indeed revised the global growth outlook downwards. So global growth now stands at 2.3% for 2025, and we're estimating 2.4% for 2026. For emerging markets, this weak global outlook limits the ability to boost job creation and to reduce extreme poverty because the terms of trade deteriorate and foreign direct investments become more subdued, the capital flows become more volatile, and there's generally more pressure on the overall macroeconomic stance. Now, in such a volatile global environment, Indonesia's economy continues to be resilient, and we observe GDP growth at slightly lower than 5%, despite the fact that there's been slightly reduced government consumption and slower investment this year. So this growth rate surpasses the average growth rate for middle-income countries and for the East Asia-Pacific region in general. This resilient growth also comes, or is perhaps due to and driven by overall positive macroeconomic indicators. Low inflation, adequate financial buffers both contributed to this resilience embedded in the Indonesian economy. It's testament to the prudent macroeconomic management of Indonesia's fiscal and monetary authorities. But we have to be realistic, and despite the prudent macroeconomic stance, we cannot say that Indonesia is immune from external pressure, such as global uncertainty. And this uncertainty is really expected to continue to exert significant downside risks and can weigh on countries' development aspirations. The best response to this global uncertainty in all countries, but Indonesia included in this, is to accelerate the domestic reform agenda. An agenda that is highlighted by President Prabowo and that focuses on deregulation, improving the business environment, attracting private investment, and strengthening human capital. All of these are structural reforms that aim to boost the economy's capacity and create better jobs, more jobs, which will benefit all Indonesians. Now, one of the important programs on the reform agenda is related to housing and infrastructure, and there's an ambitious plan to deliver 3 million housing units each year. And in this regard, I'd like to just point briefly to three findings that we have from our own analysis and review of the strategic framework. So the first is that housing construction is an engine of growth. It contributes 10% to Indonesia's GDP, and it provides 7% of total employment. Achieving the 3 million annual housing target requires that the government acts as both a housing provider and a housing facilitator. This means instituting housing regulation reforms, accelerating public-funded housing programs, and creating an enabling environment that attracts private investment. Second point would be that policies and investments that are designed to maximize the impact of every dollar spent will support the achievement of housing targets. By rebalancing the budget allocation for housing programs between new and better housing, and by adopting reforms that can connect these investments to the private sector, we believe that the country could reach more families with the right housing solution and at the right cost. Thirdly, to mobilize private capital needed, the government can adopt reforms that remove the current market distortions and build trust by helping families to save, to improve or buy their home, and by ensuring that national and foreign investors that are searching for investment opportunities in the housing market are supported. So my colleagues Habib and Luis will elaborate on our assessment and recommendations for Indonesia to manage this situation of global uncertainty, unleash the growth potential, and explore practical steps to accelerate the country's housing program. I'm very pleased we have such a distinguished and high-powered set of keynote speakers and panelists. I'm very grateful for the time for all of our guests. I wanted to just close by saying that many of you will have followed our economic work over recent years. I wanted to acknowledge our wonderful lead economist, Habib, who will be leaving us at the end of this year. Habib, can you just stand up? And many of you will have interacted with him. He has led our work very ably over the last 4 years, and we wish him very well in his next assignment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu Carey, for your opening remarks. A brief reminder, for our online participants connecting through Zoom, please note that you may switch to Bahasa Indonesia or English interpreters using button at the bottom of your screen. You can switch language during any part of the event. For participants here with us in Suhana Hall, interpreter devices are available at the back of the hall. Bagi peserta yang bergabung secara virtual lewat Zoom, Anda bisa memilih fitur penerjemah di bagian bawah layar Anda dan memilih bahasa Indonesia. Bagi Anda yang berada di Suhana Hall, apabila diperlukan, alat penerjemah tersedia di bagian belakang ruangan ini. Esteemed guests, we will now continue with a welcome address from Ibu Gita Kamath, Deputy Head of Mission, Australian Embassy for Indonesia. Good morning, Ibu Gita. Over to you.
Selamat pagi. Yang saya hormati Bapak Agus Harimurti Yudhoyono, Coordinating Minister of Infrastructure and Regional Development, Bapak Fahri Hamzah, Vice Minister of Housing and Settlement, Ibu Kari, World Bank Country Director for Indonesia and Timor-Leste, dan para presenter, panelis, dan tamu yang terhormat. I'm very pleased to be able to join today's launch of the World Bank's Indonesia Economic Prospect, or IEP. The theme of today's report, People First Housing, is an especially important one. A house is more than just a building. It helps people live with security and dignity and raise their families. Housing also plays a vital role in driving economic growth, building communities, and job creation. In Bahasa Indonesia, the three basic human needs are traditionally known as pangan, sandang, dan papan, which translates to food, clothing, and shelter in English. And out of the three, papan, or housing, is the least affordable and available for many families, not just in Indonesia, but also, for example, in my home country of Australia. And that's why housing policy is a key issue for both our countries. In Indonesia, President Prabowo has made it a priority to provide affordable homes for low-income people, including through his 3 million houses per year program. In Australia, housing shortages and affordability have been challenges for decades. Like in Indonesia, it's an ongoing topic of national interest and debate, including during Australia's recent election earlier this year. The Australian government has committed to build 1.2 million homes for Australians by 2029 and invest 10 billion for first home buyers. While these numbers are much smaller than President Prabowo's, so is our population. But in fact, this is one of the largest housing commitments made by an Australian government since the Second World War. However, fixing housing supply and improving affordability will require concerted efforts from all levels of government and the private sector. And it requires a national conversation to find comprehensive solutions. As both Indonesia and Australia work to fulfil their housing commitments, there is great opportunity to learn from each other's experiences. Our close bilateral relationship is built on mutual trust and a willingness to help one another and solve problems together. Our work with the World Bank is a great example of this. For 13 years, Australia has proudly supported evidence-based analysis from the World Bank, including this IEP. Today, the report will look at the potential of the housing sector to support poverty reduction and job creation, as well as reform opportunities from the 3 million homes target. I know this report will contribute to rich policy discussions within the Indonesian government, business and civil society as they work towards this important goal. So, in closing, I want to thank Minister Yudhoyono for the keynote speech we are about to hear, and I also want to congratulate the World Bank for producing this important report and for bringing us all together today. We hope today's discussion will bring new ideas and action so that more people can have a place to call home and a sense of community and belonging. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you, Ibu Gita, for joining us and for your welcome address. Dear Bapak dan Ibu, we were deeply honored to have Bapak Agus Harimurti Yudhoyono, the Coordinating Minister of Infrastructure and Regional Development, scheduled to deliver his remarks at today's event. However, due to the Coordinating Minister's latest official travel plan, Bapak Agus Yudhoyono is regrettably unable to join us in person. Nevertheless, we are pleased to share that Bapak Agus Harimurti Yudhoyono has graciously recorded a special message on this occasion. May I kindly invite you to direct your attention to the screen for the video remarks from Bapak Agus Harimurti Yudhoyono.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace and blessing be upon us all. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Shalom. Om Swastiastu. Namo Buddhaya. Salam kebajikan. Your Excellencies, Ministers, Ambassadors, distinguished colleagues, esteemed development partners, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. While I regret not being with you in person, I am currently representing Indonesia at the BRICS Urbanization Forum in Brasilia. Still, I am pleased to contribute to this important launch of the Indonesia Economic Prospects Report and to share a few reflections on the path ahead. Let me begin by thanking Ms. Carolyn Turk and the World Bank team. Your continued partnership and this timely, substantive report are deeply appreciated. It helps us see not just where we stand, but where we must go. President Prabowo Subianto has laid out a bold vision to strengthen food, water, and energy security through integrated and sustainable infrastructure. As Coordinating Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development, I am often asked, what will it take to achieve Indonesia's aspiration of 8% growth? My answer is simple. It will take more than building infrastructure. It will take building opportunities. And there is perhaps no greater multiplier of opportunity than housing. Let me explain the role of our ministry. We coordinate 5 portfolios: land, public works, transportation, housing, and transmigration. This integrated mandate gives us a powerful tool. It allows us to connect systems, scale solutions, and serve people first. Let me be clear. Housing is infrastructure, and when done right, it is people first infrastructure. This year's report could not be more relevant. It affirms what we now see more clearly than ever. Housing is not a side issue. It is central to national development. It is also a pillar of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities. Today, the housing and settlement sector touches at least 185 related subsectors, from building materials and logistics to land services, finance, and water. It contributes 10% of our GDP, supports 7% of jobs, and generates 8% of tax revenues. According to the report, with the right strategy, Indonesia could leverage $3.8 billion in public investments annually. This could generate over 2.3 million jobs and attract 2.8 billion US dollars in private capital. That is not a small engine. It is a powerful driver for growth, innovation, and shared prosperity. But we must face a hard truth. Too many Indonesians, especially in low-income groups, are still locked out of safe, affordable, and climate-resilient housing. That is why, under President Prabowo Subianto's leadership, we are committed to delivering 3 million housing units per year. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we must think of housing not as an endpoint, but as an entry point. An entry point to jobs, to education and health, to vibrant local economies and climate-resilient communities. And we must think long-term. By 2045, over 70% of Indonesians will live in cities. This urban shift will reshape how we plan, finance, and deliver infrastructure. Urban housing, transit-oriented development, spatial equity. These will be defining challenges of our generation. The road from homes to jobs to prosperity is not abstract. It is practical, it is local, and it is achievable if we choose to act differently. That means blending public investment with private capital. It means every rupiah must stretch further. It means accelerating land reform, not just to unlock land, but to unlock dignity and justice. It means rethinking neighborhoods as gateways to mobility and opportunity. And it means building better before disaster strikes, especially now in this era of climate volatility. We must also consider the broader economic context. Despite global uncertainties, our agriculture and service sectors showed resilience in the first quarter of 2025. With the right policies and bold reforms in housing and infrastructure, our growth trajectory can go well beyond current levels. In the coming months, our ministry will work closely with key stakeholders. Together, we will advance an integrated framework linking housing to transportation, employment, and land services. At the same time, we will partner with mayors and governors. We will develop practical planning tools and streamline regulations. This will help implementation move faster and reach further. This is what future-proof, inclusive growth looks like. And we invite all partners to walk this path with us. Help us build a future of hope and opportunity, from urban fringes to forest frontiers. In closing, I return to the same question. What will it take to reach 8% growth? It will take brave reforms, bold investments, and most of all, putting people at the center of our development. Let us begin with homes, build forward with jobs, and deliver prosperity that reaches every corner of our archipelago. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Pak Agus, for your remarks and insights. Now, another brief reminder. For our online participants connecting through Zoom, please note that you may switch to Bahasa Indonesia or English interpreters using buttons at the bottom of your screen. You can switch language during any part of the event. For participants here with us in Suhana Hall, interpreter devices are available at the back of the hall. Bagi peserta yang bergabung secara virtual lewat Zoom, Anda bisa memilih fitur penerjemah di bagian bawah layar Anda dan memilih bahasa Indonesia. Bagi Anda yang berada di Suhana Hall, apabila diperlukan, alat penerjemah tersedia di bagian belakang ruangan ini. Before we continue, I would like to invite our audience to join conversation on social media. Please follow our X account at Bank Dunia and use hashtag IEP Bank Dunia. The World Bank account will be live tweeting highlights from the next two presentations. Please take a look, like, and repost those tweets. Bapak dan Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, next on our agenda, we have a presentation on Indonesia's Economy and Outlook by Bapak Habib, lead economist for the World Bank Indonesia and Timor-Leste. Pak Habib, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Ibu Enda. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ibu Kari, Ibu Gita, and our distinguished panelists, Pa Fahri, Pa Abdul Malik, Ibu Wendy, Pa Joko, Pa Bjorn. It's a really great pleasure to be here today to present the latest edition of the Indonesia Economic Prospects on behalf of a very large team led by our senior country economist, Pawail Mansoor. Now, the focus of this edition is on housing, and what I will do is to try and set the macroeconomic context within which this discussion is taking place, and that presentation will be led by my colleague, Senior Urban Development Specialist, Pa Luis Triveno. So, over the past 6 months, uncertainty has risen very sharply, both globally but also in Indonesia. And what is quite striking is that even when you compare to a major shock like COVID and everything that happened in the aftermath, uncertainty levels have been extremely high. Why does this matter? Because uncertainty, unlike risk, is very difficult to measure. Risk is easier to measure and take corrective actions for. It's like looking at the weather by looking at the weather forecast for the chances of rain to decide whether or not you want to take your umbrella. That is measuring risk. But with uncertainty, you don't have that information. You don't have the information on the weather. So it makes it much more difficult to make policy choices, to make investment decisions, and also consumption decisions. When this clarity fades, sentiment tends to take over. And nowhere have we seen this more explicitly than in the financial markets. So as inflation has remained quite sticky over the past year, and then tariff announcements have also been made. This has raised concerns over cost and prices. So central banks in developed economies have held interest rates higher for somewhat longer. And this has triggered capital outflows, which is what this first chart illustrates. So in the first half of 2025, capital outflows from a lot of emerging market economies accelerated. In Indonesia, non-residents, so foreigners, sold around 0.3 percentage points of GDP of rupiah assets in net terms. And that's the green bar that is highlighted in this first chart. And foreign direct investment also fell by around 40% year on year in the first quarter. Equity markets dropped, but one encouraging sign, you can see this in the March 2025 bar, is that inflows into government bonds actually accelerated, which helped to reduce the net outflow in assets from Indonesia. But beyond these short-term ups and downs, I wanted to highlight two specific points related to this. The first is that the net outflows from Indonesia are relatively modest, only 0.3 percentage points of GDP. And this is partly because Indonesia's financial markets are also quite small. They are quite shallow, and I will come back to this point later on. The second is that despite this low level of net outflow, the rupiah still saw sharp depreciation over the past few months. Now, the rupiah has been depreciating quite consistently since the middle of 2024, when capital outflows started to accelerate because central banks decided to maintain higher interest rates for a longer period of time. And the rupiah hit a low in April when non-resident equity sell-offs peaked, a trend that we saw across many emerging market economies. When uncertainty increased, many non-resident investors sold assets from emerging markets. But even with relatively low outflows from Indonesia, currency pressures were strong. And that is because, I repeat, Indonesia's financial markets are quite shallow, with fewer assets to purchase and less investor diversity. So to illustrate, if you imagine two buckets of water, one which is quite full and one which is only a quarter full, if you shake both buckets equally, then the one that is less full will see more ripples. And that is what shallow financial markets create. That when you have equivalent amount of turbulence, the volatility in the shallow markets tend to be greater. Now, that said, despite the currency pressure that Indonesia and other emerging market economies experienced, the volatility of the currency was somewhat less. So what this chart shows is that the shaded part is the range of volatility that large emerging markets experienced over the past few years, and the blue line is Indonesia. So Indonesia is at the bottom end of the shaded part, which shows that the volatility was somewhat less, which is partly due to the interventions of the central bank to maintain currency volatility. Now, shallow financial markets also create fiscal challenges. This chart shows Indonesia's interest to revenue ratio, so how much government revenue goes towards interest payments. Under different scenarios, exchange rate shocks, a slowdown in GDP, an expenditure shock, you can see that the interest share of revenue is rising quite quickly. So despite low levels of government debt in Indonesia, government debt is at around 40% of GDP, compared to 55% for middle-income country averages, the interest to revenue ratio still remains quite high, at around 20%. That compares to a middle-income country average or an upper middle-income country average of 8.5%. So the interest to revenue ratio in Indonesia is around 20%, compared to an upper middle-income country average of around 8.5%, and a high-income country average of around 4%. Why is this the case? Now, there are two reasons. The first, of course, is that revenue collection is quite low. So even if interest payments in absolute terms are quite modest, they take up a bigger share of revenue when revenue itself is quite limited. And this relates back to shallow financial markets. So if companies are not utilizing the financial system for transactions, for investments, for operations, it makes it somewhat easier for companies to either avoid or even evade taxes. The second reason is that during periods of uncertainty, bond yields tend to increase. And in fact, bond spreads also tend to rise, especially when interest rates generally remain quite high globally. And this raises borrowing costs when uncertainty increases. And this further raises this interest to revenue ratio. Now, these challenges are all connected. Shallow financial markets, low revenue mobilization, increased volatility, which reinforces the importance of fiscal and monetary discipline, a point that Ibu Kari made in her introductory remarks, which the authorities have maintained over this period of uncertainty. Now, thanks to this discipline, and despite this high levels of uncertainty and volatility, what we see is that Indonesia's macroeconomic fundamentals, as Ibu Kari mentioned in her introductory remarks, also remain resilient. So what this first chart shows on the x-axis is Indonesia's and other emerging market economies' growth rate in 2024. And what the y-axis shows is Indonesia and other emerging market economies' growth rate expected in 2025. And Indonesia is in the top right-hand corner, which is a high growth rate economies. It is slightly below the 45-degree line, which shows that we are projecting a very slight decrease in growth, from 5% to around 4.7%. But it's important to know that over 60% of these economies that I have illustrated in this chart also are expecting to slow down because of the increased uncertainty that we see in the global economy, which has affected investment decisions. At the same time, inflation is also projected to remain low. In fact, it's projected to decline for Indonesia. In this case, it's in the bottom left-hand corner of the chart. On the fiscal side, policy is expected to remain prudent, with the deficit only slightly rising to 2.7% of GDP in 2025, whilst the current account deficit is projected to widen from 0.6% to 1.3% of GDP, mainly due to declining terms of trade as commodity prices soften. Now, beyond these sound macroeconomic fundamentals, which include rising labor force participation. So labor force participation in Indonesia is at 70% at the moment, and unemployment has actually declined to below 5%. There is an underlying challenge in this, which is that of good job creation, which is a point that Minister Ahaye also mentioned in his opening remarks. So as of 2024, 69% of workers in Indonesia are employed in activities that produce less than 8 million rupiah per month in value added per worker. In contrast, high productivity sectors, sectors that produce higher value services and manufacturing output, only account for 10% of the workforce. And the economy, and we have mentioned this in past Indonesia Economic Prospect reports also, is really struggling to reverse this trend. In fact, when you look at the share of workers that earn middle class wages, it has actually declined from around 14% in 2019 to 8% in 2024. And this is concentrating workers, and this is what this chart shows, in low value added activities, manufacturing and services, and including agriculture. Now, this means that the declining share of workforce is a declining share of the workers is earning, a declining share of the workforce is earning enough to afford a middle class lifestyle. So what this chart shows is that between 2019 and 2024, the consumption growth of the aspiring middle class at 1.3% average per year has been lower than the poorest 40%, which of course might signal some degree of catch-up. So if the poorer people are earning is rising or consumption is rising more quickly than the middle class, then it might suggest some catch-up. But what is also happening is that the top 10% consumption growth is much higher than the middle class. And as a result, the share of workers, as I said, earning a middle class wage is actually declining. And this is a real challenge for Indonesia. The growth of the middle class is a signal of an expanding market for more sophisticated goods and services that drive economic growth. So how to tackle this challenge? On the one side, The challenge is ensuring that workers have sufficient capabilities, that they bring the type of cognitive skills that are needed in good jobs. This is a function of education, health, and infrastructure, as we'll hear in the next presentation, which are largely, although not exclusively, provided by the public sector. Now, to ensure the right quantity and quality of these services, we need fiscal space, which is a function of spending efficiency, government debt, and government revenue. Now, capabilities are of course necessary, but they are not sufficient. In fact, I would argue that in Indonesia, capabilities of workers is not even the binding constraint to good jobs in the country. The binding constraint are opportunities in the market. And there is a lot of data to point towards this. Opportunities, in turn, are a function of the depth of the private sector and the sophistication of the goods and services that they produce. The objective should be to expand those companies and those sectors that produce more sophisticated, higher value manufacturing and services in the economy. And this is a function of business enabling policies. This is called many different things, including deregulation policies or structural reforms or market efficiency policies. These business enabling policies are critical to deepening the financial sector, returning to what we spoke about at the beginning, which determines the cost of financing, but also the amount of government revenue that can be collected. Now, the government has indicated that it would like to pursue deregulation efforts as well as structural reforms associated with OECD accession. These include trade reforms to remove costly barriers to imports or market restrictions that prevent new or more productive businesses to engage, or reviewing how businesses of the state crowd out private sector businesses. And we have quite detailed analysis on this coming up in a new report and including in the IEP, where removal of some of the most egregious non-tariff measures actually lead to much higher investment, exports, and economic growth. But even if you look at the history of Indonesia, Indonesia actually experienced its fastest level of economic growth over a sustained period when it implemented the most structural reforms in the late 80s, early 1990s. This is because business enabling policies, deregulation, and liberalization efforts help to open up space for investment in the manufacturing sector. The same opportunity exists today, both in the manufacturing sector and in the services sector, which remain quite restricted. What these charts show is how domestic investment peaked in the early 90s thanks to these reforms. And it was not just domestic investments, but also foreign investments that peaked and helped to deepen the capacity of Indonesia's manufacturing sector. This expansion of more sophisticated manufacturing coincided with a period when tax collection also peaked in Indonesia. So to conclude, through this period of uncertainty, Indonesia has a great opportunity to accelerate business enabling policy reforms, to deregulate, which would help to trigger good jobs, stronger consumption, financial deepening, higher taxes, and the resources needed to deliver on the government's priority program, including on housing, which we will hear more about from my colleague, Luis Triveno. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Habib, for that engaging presentation. Before we move to our next segment, I would like to note that all presentations, as well as the IEP report, will be available for download later today. Please visit our website, worldbank.org/IEP, to download the materials. Also, we invite you to follow the World Bank Indonesia X account at Bank Dunia. To be part of the conversation on social media, don't forget to use the hashtag IEP Bank Dunia. Dear esteemed guests, Bapak dan Ibu, we will now continue with a presentation on People First Housing, a roadmap from homes to jobs to prosperity in Indonesia, which will be presented by Bapak Luis Triveno, Senior Urban Development Specialist in the World Bank. Pak Luis, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Today I want to speak about something that will shape the future of Indonesia: housing. I've worked in housing policy and reconstruction for decades in dozens of countries, so I can tell you one thing. When we talk about housing, we are speaking about more than building walls and roofs. Housing policy includes things like that may seem unrelated, like infrastructure or taxes. It touches education and community health. In other words, housing is about lives. It's about jobs. It's about economic growth. And it's literally about building a better future for families, for governments, and for all of us. So I know Indonesia's plan to deliver 3 million homes a year is more than just a housing target. It's a pathway to raise GDP growth to 8%. It's a plan to eliminate poverty. And it will be an engine to create jobs. And most importantly, to deliver on President Prabowo's promise of a more equitable Indonesia. Ultimately, it's about making Indonesia's founding vision of housing for all a reality. This is the focus of the June edition of the Indonesian Economic Prospects. The report makes clear that the target of delivering 3 million housing solutions per year is achievable. This is the good news. But it is achievable if and only if Indonesia pursues a series of specific, targeted reforms, investments, and policies designed to maximize the impact of every single dollar spent. This will require public dollars being invested in the right places, at the right times, in the right ways. And this will also require reforms and policies to attract private dollars. And finally, this will have to happen at incredible scale and speed. To meet the 3 million homes target, the report shows that Indonesia will need at least $3.8 billion every year in public funding. That is about a 75% increase over the average annual housing budgets in the last decade, which were linked to a target of 1 million homes per year. So clearly, this requires being even more efficient with housing funds. But of course, as all you well know, public money will not be enough. That's why private capital needs to be mobilized. Today, Indonesia's mortgage debt is just 5% of GDP, compared to up to 50% in many developed countries. This gap is not a weakness, it's an opportunity. By reforming housing finance, by unlocking capital markets, Indonesia can bring in the billions it needs. From banks, from pension funds, from insurance companies, from housing microfinance institutions, even from the Indonesian diaspora. Just imagine diaspora housing bonds, channels for global Indonesian families to help build homes here, housing-backed securities to draw in long-term investors, new mortgage products to make housing loans more accessible, new housing microfinance products to make sure informal workers aren't left behind. Now, it will be hard because there are no shortcuts, only trade-offs between cost, speed, and sustainability. But we actually know it's possible because Indonesia has proven many times that it can successfully launch and scale difficult public programs. This country, your country, boasts some of the best and largest home improvement efforts in the world. One of the most effective slum migrating programs in history, and the world's biggest property titling program. Now, these are all reasons to be proud. The world is actually learning how to improve homes, upgrade living conditions in slums, or granting property rights thanks to Indonesia. Now, Indonesia can also learn from countries that have transformed their housing markets, from Brazil, Mexico, or Colombia, to India, Egypt, or Morocco. Now, these countries did not become housing powerhouses through business as usual. They require leaders with the will and experts who show the way, and work together, of course. And that's what Indonesia will need to achieve the 3 million housing units goal. So I want that we all take together a look at the key decisions and hard conversations that need to be taken in the housing sector. The first one is regarding how the housing budget is allocated. Now, almost 90% of current housing budget is targeted at one type of housing solution, new housing. And yes, more than 5 million families do need new homes, so this must remain a priority. But another 26 million families, 83% of families living in deficit, only need improvements to the homes they already have. And here's a relevant comparison. Here's why it matters. Better housing solutions cost 75% less than one for a new house. Yes, 75% less. Now, the balance between funding new versus better homes in housing budgets determines many other results that sometimes we don't even think of, including where and how many jobs are created, which types of jobs, and the number of families who will benefit. So with the same level of investment, a choice to focus on better housing can mean up to 3 times as many jobs. The second decision and conversation to have is one regarding the best method. So we can think of housing interventions like as tools in a toolbox. But before you pick the tool, you must first identify the goal, right? Say it was raining today. I could go to the best raincoat store in Jakarta and buy their best raincoat, one with ventilation panel and heat retention layers, even special pockets for my AirPods. This would absolutely keep me dry. But if my goal is to stay dry, I could also just use a $1 umbrella from any corner store. And if I have limited budget, or I need to keep a lot of people dry, the $1 umbrella might be the best choice. In the same way, today Indonesia is supporting the access to new housing to low-income families through FLPP, offering 5% fixed interest rate for 20 years, which is a very effective mechanism. But it is also the most expensive tool in the toolkit. This is why scaling up by 5 times or 10 times isn't feasible with its current design. Why? Because it makes next to impossible to attract investors. These large investors are interested in Indonesia, but mostly at returns higher than the 5% offered by the low-income housing mortgage portfolio. At the same time, earning only 0.5% for FLPP deposits while paying investors 7% or more for government bonds is not the best financial business for the government. In other words, FLPP is a very nice raincoat. Lots of people need those. But if the goal is to offer as much housing as possible, we also need to start finding some umbrellas. The third decision is regarding how Indonesia wants cities to grow and citizens to live. Urban areas, without a doubt, are the engines of growth, especially large cities and metropolitan areas. Indonesia's urbanization growth return on GDP is today similar to the one in China and other EAP countries. Indonesia has earned between 40% and 50% more in cities than in their villages. But today, cities in Indonesia face significant challenges because housing shortages and high costs are either forcing families into overcrowded settlements or push them far away with long commutes and high costs. The fourth decision is that the 3 million homes program will definitely affect how cities grow in Indonesia. And how sustainable is that growth? Now consider this. If every new home was a single-story house, meaning the new housing, meeting the new housing goal will require 100,000 hectares, an area nearly twice the size of Jakarta. But by building denser and smarter with vertical housing in cities, we can cut that land demand by more than 90%. Now, as I said before, this isn't going to be easy because one size does not fit all regions of Indonesia. Land availability and prices are highest just where the demand for housing is largest. Now, this is where public asset management becomes essential. Indonesia has vast idle public land. All facilities, underused government plots, places that can be transformed into housing sites in partnership with the private sector. Now, across the nation, public land can be key to unlock affordable housing if recorded properly, managed strategically, and transparently, and specifically close to the areas where the government of Indonesia has already invested more than $5 billion in transport infrastructure in the last decade. Now, a different financing strategy is also needed simply because the subsidy amounts of the housing programs are not enough for large cities. Here, blended finance can come to the rescue, articulating multiple funding sources for integrated infrastructure investments. An urban operator like Perumnas, BUMN, or BUMD can bridge the gap between national ambition and local action. So, how could Indonesia make all this happen? The answer is found in a balanced approach, one that balances investments and reform. So not just more money, but smarter ways to spend it. So not just better programs, but stronger institutions to deliver them. One approach that builds trust, not through words, but through actions that deliver impact. And building this trust with people, with developers, with investors, with donors, that takes time. And it can be lost faster than it was earned. But it is only when this trust exists that the government will be able to reach its housing goals. And this brings me to my last point. Roadmaps are good to think about the future and have a plan to reach one's goals. But Indonesia must expect the unexpected. Indonesia is a country of incredible natural beauty and biodiversity, but it is also the front line of climate and disaster risk. Floods, earthquakes, volcano eruptions, you name it. In the past, Indonesia has been told to build back better. But to maximize every dollar and protect these housing infrastructure investments we just talked about, Indonesia must build better before the disaster strikes, before the earth shakes, the storm hits, or the waters rise. As a famous surgeon once put it, if people are constantly falling off a cliff, you have two choices. You could place ambulances under the cliff, or you could build a fence on the top of the cliff. It's also far cheaper. In fact, every dollar invested in housing resilience can save up to $10 in reconstruction costs after a disaster. So Indonesia, on top of the umbrellas, also needs to start building more fences. Every new home must be earthquake resistant and built with climate smart design. It will be hard enough to deliver the 3 million housing units per year, let alone rebuild half of them 5 years later. No? And we know at the end of the day, this is not about numbers on a spreadsheet or on a World Bank report. It's about real people, families and workers and children who dream of a safe, secure place to call home. As I said at the start, this is not just about delivering the 3 million homes a year. We are just not talking about construction. We are talking about a better, stronger future for Indonesia. That is a future that can be achieved by putting people first. And that is a future that we at the World Bank wanted to contribute to with the document we are releasing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Luis, for your insightful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now head on to the panel discussion on Getting It Done, Pathways from Policy to Impact, which will be moderated by Bapak Bjorn Philip, Manager in the East Asia of the World Bank. Bapak Bjorn, please do make your way up to the stage. And could our esteemed panelists also please join on stage? Let us welcome Bapak Fahri Hamzah, Vice Minister of Housing and Settlement, Ministry of Housing and Settlement. Bapak Abdul Malik Sadat Idris, Deputy of Infrastructure, Bappenas. Ibu Wendy Haryanto, Executive Director of Jakarta Property Institute. And Bapak Joko Suranto, Chairman of Indonesia Real Estate Association.
Good morning, everyone. Very glad to be here with this very distinguished panel today to talk about the Indonesia Economic Prospects Report with the focus on housing. And let me start with introducing our panelists. We have a very accomplished, distinguished panel here, so I will need to read their very impressive CVs and bios. Let me start with Pak Fahri Hamzah. He is the Vice Minister of Housing and Settlement. He has over 2 decades of experience in public service in Indonesia. Previously, he served as the Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, where he played a key role in legislative reform and oversight. He also is the Vice Chairman of the Partai Gelora Indonesia and has been actively involved in shaping Indonesia's political and economic discourse through his leadership, publications, and public engagement. Mr. Hamzah holds a degree in economics from Universitas Indonesia and has pursued further studies in public policy and economics in Indonesia and in the UK. Beyond politics, he is President Director of CGN Consulting. He brings deep expertise in governance, public policy, and institutional reform and has authored numerous books on democracy, welfare, and economic transformation. We are happy to have Mr. Hamzah joining today's panel discussion, where he will contribute with his insights on housing sector reforms and his role in inclusive development. Welcome, Pak Farah. Next, let me introduce Pak Abdul Malik Salat Idris. He is the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure at the Ministry of National Development Planning, the National Development Planning Agency, Bappenas. He supports the ministry in developing national policies and plans for infrastructure development in Indonesia. He holds a bachelor degree in civil engineering from Bandung Institute of Technology and has a master of civil engineering majoring in coastal engineering from the University of Tokyo. Mr. Idris has over 15 years of experience working in water resource management, and he has also worked for more than 3 years in regional development, more than 7 years in defense and security affairs. Prior to his current position, he played a key role in regional development planning for the 25-29 National Medium-Term Development Plan, where he played a functional role. He developed the functional regional analysis, including the multi-infrastructure corridor, utilizing geographic information systems and digital twin technologies. He also seeks innovative financing and management approaches for the water sector, particularly in encouraging private sector involvement in the management of multi-purpose dams, water supply, and flood risk management. Additionally, he focuses on energy transition and transportation connectivity. He believes that blended financing and robust infrastructure data are among the key solutions to support the success of the national development agenda. His expertise in geospatial analysis and digital transformation provides valuable insights for enhancing infrastructure systems and fostering sustainable development in Asia Pacific. Welcome, Pak Abdul. Next, let me go to Ibu Wendy Haryanto. She is the Executive Director of the Jakarta Property Institute, JPI. Prior to joining JPI in 2014, Wendy served as Chief Operating Officer for a mixed-use development project At Procon Savils, Indonesia, Wendy served as director and led 3 retail divisions: retail consulting, retail leasing, and retail tenant representation. She was responsible for all aspects of development, including master planning and conceptualization, market segmentation, investor relations, and operational direction. Wendy has 30 years of experience in the property industry, who have honed her skills in negotiation, property concept development, project execution, and leadership. After college, Wendy began her career at the consulting firm Procon Inda. Then she deepened her knowledge working at Sumarekon Agung, Agung Podomro Group, Sirat Panggang, Hero Supermarket, Ranch Market, and the consulting firm Jones Lang LaSalle. Wendy holds a Bachelor of Arts in International Business from the San Diego State University in California, USA. Welcome you, Wendy. Last but not least, let me introduce Pak Joko Suranto. He is the chairman of the Indonesia Real Estate Association. He's also the CEO and founder of Buana Kasati Group, a company involved in various sectors including property, finance, and hospitality. He has a strong educational background with a bachelor's degree in civil law from Universitas Sebelas Maret and a master's degree in business law from Universitas Katolik Parahyangan. Joko has extensive experience in the banking sector, having worked at PT Bank Tambungan Negara from 1997 to 2008. And since 2009, he has been leading Buana Kasati Group, overseeing 33 projects across 13 cities and districts in West Java and 1 in West Sumatra. His notable projects include BPR Buana Arta Kasati in Purbalingga, BPR Danatama Arta Kasiti in Kuningan, Tebing View Resort in Lembang, Bandung, and Faith Hotel in Cimanuk, Garut. Joko is also actively involved in various organizations, serving as the chairman of DRP REI, chairman of ICA UNS Foundation, vice chairman of the Regional Economic Recovery Committee, KPID in West Java, and vice chairman of Kadin West Java. He also is a mentor to 363 pesantren, which are Islamic boarding schools, including in West Java. Throughout his career, Joko has received numerous rewards, including the BTN Property Award for multiple years, the BJB Award, the Mandiri Region Java Best Group Developer, and the REI Excellence Award. He was also recognized as an inspirational figure in Central Java in the field of economics and business. So, welcome, Pak Joko, very accomplished panel, as you can tell from those introductions. Let's get started with the discussion. We have heard in the presentation earlier about the very ambitious program that President Prabowo has set out to build 3 million housing units per year. Let me start with Pak Fahri. Indonesia has some of the world's most impactful initiatives in the housing sector. We heard about the slum upgrading program, Kotaku, the home improvement program like BSPS, the property titling, but also housing reconstruction after disasters. Building on the strong foundation, Indonesia now aspires to become a global leader in housing. In your view, what will it take for Indonesia to reach this goal? Is Indonesia ready to make the right investments in the right locations at the right time? What is missing?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank World Bank for inviting me for these meetings, and to all the presentation given by the World Bank, especially the one and the last from Luis. I think representing the whole ideas that we want to do in Indonesia's housing policies in the future. And basically, I also already trying to simplify the whole idea that we want to do in the future. But before entering that policies, we have a problem with the transition of the government. And as far as I understand, I'm working, as you said, more than 15 years in the parliament. So sometimes my mentality is like the opposition mentality, and really, really enjoy to criticize everything. And that is basically my mentality. And the problem in the housing policy was unstable, policies since beginning, and creates unstable institution. And that's why this housing ministry is moving from one form to another form, sometimes joining with, what they call as Kim Praswil, and then Kim Bangwil, and then unite in the PUPR, becoming small ministries, and now separated from the Ministry of Public Works. And I hope that the initiative of President Prabowo, by mentioning about 3 million houses per year, which is already becoming the promise to the people, will making the policy in the housing more permanent in the future. So we try now to create a very solid institution from very solid regulation, and that is the born of the Ministry of Housing and Settlement. We have Pak Boni here as also member of the Housing Task Force, formed by President Prabowo soon after announced on becoming president-elect, forming a special task force for the housing, directly led by his brother, Pak Hashim Joyo Hadikusumo, and that is the beginning of all the policies we want to do regarding the housing in this country. So the idea is exactly just like what Louis said. We want to contribute to the growth of 8%, and then we want to eradicate the poverty, and we want to absorb as many as possible workforce in Indonesia. So the implementation will be going into 3 main policies. Number one is, as you mentioned, about the BSPS. We want to continue that program. We already get the information from the Ministry of Finance. Probably this week will be announced that the President ordered to build or to renovate 2 million houses. So before, the capacity of the decision of the policies are only 150,000 houses to be renovated every year. But now the President ordered, even we still only have like 6 months before December, the President insisted that we need to renovate 2 million. So it will cover like 43.6 trillion rupiah from our national budget, which means that every house will be count 21.8 million rupiah per houses, which 1.8 million will be going to the ministry to find the training all the administrative side of the policies. 2.5 million will be going to the owners, to the business beneficiaries, to the owners of the house, and 17.5 million will be going to the materials. This is also ask our ministry to join with another ministry, especially the Ministry of Cooperative, because we want to activate the Merah Putih Cooperative to join in the providing the materials for the housing renovation. That is the first one. The second one is regarding what is said about Kotaku. We work with the Ministry of Marine and Fisheries to prioritize the coastal area, which in Indonesia we have close to 13,000 coastal area, need to be renovated, the complex, the settlement. And the President already agreed to the Ministry of KKP, Fishery and Marine and Fishery, to renovate 1,000 settlement in the coastal area. So our ministry probably will be at more 300 settlements. So the total renovation in the settlement area will be 10% of the total coastal area in Indonesia. So 2 million will be 10% from the backlog of the adequate housing, and 1,300 will be 10% from the coastal area. So the last one of the policy, will be needed very good formula of the financing, because the president already announced, especially when he met a couple of days ago in front of the Prime Minister Lawrence Wong in Singapore, because one of the example of the housing policy is the HDB in Singapore. The president said that we want to build 1 million units of vertical housing in Indonesia. This 1 million unit will be used not only to absorb the demand of 10 million backlog of the housing, but also to renovate our city where the slum and the polluted area across the sea and also the river, Riverview, Riverside, will be renovated by building the vertical housing, which probably started with 3 floors into 30 floors of the vertical housing all over cities in Indonesia. So this is the 3 combination of the policies that probably will solve, not only the problem of housing, but also the most important thing in politics, because the president already promised 3 million housing. So 3 million means that 2 million renovation per year and 1 million building of the units vertical housing per year. So this is 3 million. So the additional will be coming from the renovation of the coastal area. So business-like, political-like, we've done everything by this policy. Thank you, Luis, for your recommendation. Thank you very much. That is the...
Thank you very much. Thank you. So you clearly are taking the path to leveraging what you have in place already with the global experience that is accessible to you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Very good. Let me now turn to Pak Abdul. Pak Abdul, we know that delivering housing at scale requires more than just building new homes and renovating existing ones, right? It also means putting the infrastructure in place that those households and the communities will need. Now, Indonesia has a dual challenge there in a way. On one hand is closing the service delivery gaps in informal settlements, but also investing in infrastructure that can really drive economic growth in urban areas. Given the uniqueness of every single city, both on the budget side, but also on the unique conditions, how can the government balance closing infrastructure gaps while investing in a way to attract the private sector, and all this in a way that really maximizes impact? And then maybe a follow-up question on that, how would this differ in high growth areas like Jakarta and Bali, who have very different contexts as other places? Pak Abdul.
Thank you. I think I want to start by using the lens of the population that has not targeted with the current program. That is the lower middle income, informal economy, that in fact they pay more compared with the current FLPP. Somebody said they pay 18% mortgage per year just to afford the house. So means that's a target also of the public infrastructure. Public infrastructure that we mobilize all the resource through the blended financing and cooperative. Yeah. For instance, we have a big program of the SDG to improving our household connection of our water, improving the wastewater. So before we have the national strategy, but in hand, but when we go through some regional or some city scale, it's not well calibrated in such area. So now we improve that planning, that this housing program should integrate it with the current infrastructure initiative, including also the transit-oriented development. And we know that we need to mobilize all the resource. How actually the people pay more can be mobilized as disposable income. I'm not an economist, but at the end, combining with the public financing. through. So this blended financing, I think, one of the key strategy, and put the real project in the location, because that's I think the hurdles. Yeah, in for instance, I did a Palu reconstruction several years ago. How to connect the housing reconstruction with the current, with the water services, it's a big headache. So means we need to deliver, cooperate more with the local government also. Because the central government, I think they're a regulator, the issue. But the central government, Bappenas now formulate what will be the new schemes, new initiative scheme that can improve the current schemes. So we have Danantara, we have commercial financing. That's it for the middle up country. We have infrastructure financing, but at the end, I come back from the meeting this morning, discuss with Pak Fahri, Secretary General and the DGs, and also with the bank to apply for the next bank program. That the management is a must, I think, in terms of the Ministry of Housing, to mobilize all the resource and to reform the regulation. That is our focus. But one gap maybe, when I try my staff, what is the pipeline? What is the pipeline in the Metro Jabodetabek? What is the pipeline in Batam Island? What is the pipeline in Molucca, in the mountain of Papua? Now we don't have yet formulate that tactical or that operation in the regional level, because I think we have different challenge when we downscale this strategic planning into some act local, in local act. So Bappenas now formulate with Pak Fahri office and also all the stakeholder how to create the real pipeline on the field, and testing the new pilot of the scheme, improving the scheme, and I hope by next year we can implement 10 pilot project of the new scheme that it will improve on top of the current successful scheme. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Abdul. Please. Very good. I want to go next to Ibu Wendy. We have heard a little bit earlier that 5 times as many Indonesians will need better housing compared to new housing. This is like 26.9 million people households versus 5.4 million households. In your view, is the housing demand in Indonesia currently met by the market, particularly when it comes to supply and affordability, and particularly looking at urban areas? And what are key opportunities to help large segments of informal workers and younger generations to access housing solutions they need?
Selamat pagi. Thank you, Bjorn. The answer would be a bit long and windy, but I'll try to explain it a bit. First and foremost, I think we have to understand the underlying problem of our housing issues. Even before President Prabowo stated that he wanted to deliver the 3 million housing, we already had a housing issue. Okay? Now, there is backlog and there is bankable. When I look at backlog, this is an argument I always have with every discussion I have when it comes to housing. You need to split up the backlog within formal and informal. The formal sector are normally the bankable ones, right? Because they have decent employments, they have a plethora of employments, they can go to the bank, they can get the loan. And then there is the informal sector, whereby it's a whole different ball game. Now, our problem in the city, urban right now, is our bankable backlog cannot find houses. Because the demand does not meet the supply. It's just like a moving target for them. So many other programs are being proposed by the government, normally goes to the informal sector. But I think the underlying problem right now is our middle class is not being addressed. Okay? So we need to split it up into two. How do we address it? Despite of that, we also have two other issues. We have housing issues that's always been raised, the 3 million housing that we need to deliver every year. And we also have ownership issue. That's another thing as well. So we need to combine those. So if we need to house people, or do we need to make them own the houses? All right, so Louis initially on the presentation mentioned about 5.1% mortgage debt. Okay, that's way, way below than what we should be achieving. Okay, so what is it on the financial institution that becomes hindrance for them to deliver to our people in order to own the houses? This program is not going to be a short one. It's probably going to take a few years for us to negotiate and lobby the financial institutions, create programs, new policies, intervention, regulations, and all so forth. Like Pa Agus mentioned earlier, it has to be local and it has to be practical. But we all know in this room that nothing in this country is ever local and practical. It's very bureaucratic and it's super complicated. Hence, having said that, we need to just define, what do we want to do? Do we want to house people or do we want them to own the houses? If we just want to house them, then there are many other unconventional ways to do so. You mentioned opportunities and our younger generations. What about rentals? What about rent to own? What about co-living? Pak Fahari initially mentioned about kampung revitalization, ya Pak. We have many, many kampungs within the city, many. I mean, we look beyond the buildings that we occupy. There are actually kampungs over there. It can be revitalized by verticalization of those areas. You provide more areas within the city for the people who are working in the city, which is our middle class. Okay, so I hope I answered some of that question.
You definitely put a few very important points out there. It's a complex issue. We won't be able to resolve it, but very interesting to hear your perspectives. Let me turn to Pak Joko now. I mean, I think one thing that really became clear in the presentation and in the conversation so far, that delivering the goal of 3 million homes will require private sector involvement. The government cannot do it alone. From your perspective, what's your take on the 3 million housing program? Are you optimistic? Is the glass empty, half full? Is it full? What's your views from the private sector?
Thank you, Mr. Pyong. Of course, we all here optimistic, but we must consider to government to make sure some policies, and we regard that 3 million home program is a bold strategic and well-measured initiative to address Indonesian housing backlog and the prevalence of uninhabitability homes, RTLH. Private sector involvement is crucial, and the ambitious target cannot be achieved by the government alone. Private sector participation is essential. As member of Restart Indonesia, we represent Merah Putih developers who are always ready to contribute to the nation and the state. We are highly optimistic about the program potential. Under the property economic framework, Ray believes the property sector can serve as a powerful engine for economic growth. However, if the program is managed properly, we believe it will offer great opportunities and impact, especially with the support of a priority initiative and enabling regulation. The private sector can contribute significantly to the financing, development, and management of housing. Nonetheless, key challenges remain, particularly in regularity, alignment, and access to financing. To fully realize the program potential, it is imperative that government foster and environment conducive to private investment. If this barrier can be addressed, we are confident the program will succeed and deliver lasting benefit to Indonesian people. Thank you.
Thanks, Pak Joko. So definitely optimistic there.
Optimistic.
But a little bit of the glass needs to be filled from your point of view. Let me go back to Pak Fari, staying a little bit on the same topic. If we look back at the last decade, between 2015 2024, government programs have supported around 36% of the housing needs in Indonesia, and the remaining units were delivered by the private sector. To scale up housing delivery will now need even more private capital, even more private sector participation, both from firms and from households. In your view, what are the key reforms that the country needs to undertake to build trust, to attract the private sector and sustain private sector investment in housing?
Yeah, because if you see the combination of the financings, the renovation will 100% goes to the national budget. As I said, as I mentioned, that the Ministry of Finance already agreed to allocate 21.8 million per house. So means that if it is going to become 2 million houses for the renovation, is like 43.6 trillion rupiah per year. And it's done, it's already agreed by the Minister of Finance, and I think this week will be the finalizing of the scheme using the national budget. So this is 100% goes to the government as the element of the subsidy to the people. But renovation doesn't mean that it is not going to become a new and affordable, and also the house that goes to the standard that we have, by the SDGs and also some other standards, because that amount of money will only becoming the stimulant to the individual, the beneficiaries, which probably also can add some more of their asset and money. Now we are analyzing on the effect to the lowest extreme poverty, which is consists of 1 million families in Indonesia, consider very extreme poverty, because we are afraid if you just give the stimulant and they sell the productive asset, it is not going to solve the problem, but it is going to become a new problem for that. That's why probably the money that given to them will be increases after the study that we have. So you mentioned, for example, about Prona. Prona will be the first collateral for the extreme poverty. And after you renovate the house, that will be becoming the second collateral. And by good, having asset consists of land, and then renovated house would become this family entering the next stage and the next decile, so they can have an asset that will be bankable, as the ladies mentioned about that. That is the second finance scheme that will be 100% went to the government budget. But I think the idea that I introduced now to the government after seeing all these things, we need to change the way we, fund the building of the house. I tend to move to the land subsidy, because this is what we have in Indonesia now. If you're giving the land 100, with no limitation, controlled by the property developer, and the trend is the price of the house, the price of the land, becoming very, very speculated. Bringing all those guys, saying themselves as a developer is not, I don't mention about my friend Pak Joko, but probably the other big guys, they change not to becoming the developer, but becoming the speculator of the land. That's why they control the land in the city so much. So they the house, the price of the house becoming unaffordable for everyone, you know. So now the government should move the subsidy, not for the financing of the, you know, in the end, but to provide the land subsidy, and this can be combined to the zoning policies and, you know, the urban development, the urban planning, that all the land built for the social housing must be owned by the government. We can go to the state-owned company, we go to the local government. So then we started a project that there will be no land, if not owned by the government, to becoming the social housing development. So, you know, considering the price of the land, which is very high in the city, you know, means that you reduce close to 50% of the price of the house. So if you already reduce 50% of the price of the house, and then they can go to the regular bank, to the mortgage bank, to get their, you know, credit schemes. And this will be, you know, giving us not only the combination of the element of the financing, but also the competition will be fair because it is going to the technology, the human resources, not going to the price of the land. I'm trying to see that the land now here is already becoming the element of the competition, including competition in the court, and broken our court, bribing the police, bribing the attorney, bribing the judge, you know. So take over the land, as the president always said, you know, I will use this Pasal 33, you know, 33 decree, the Constitution, which says that the land should be controlled by the government, especially the land for the housing and the social housing, and especially in the city. So I already talked to some of the government. I said, we will control the land. We will use all the land owned by the local government to control the building of the social housing. We are talking about the social housing. I'm not talking about the premium, housing that goes to the market. No problem of that. You know, we are talking about the social housing, which is very essential to Indonesia now. I think that is my answer. Sorry if you are not satisfied with that one.
No, it's very, I think it's a key element that you're pointing there on the land availability and the prices of land. I think that's absolutely critical. Before we go to Pak Abdul, let me stay a little bit on this topic of how to mobilize and bring in the private sector. Let me go back to Pak Joko on this one. We heard earlier that the housing sector in Indonesia is like 0.18% of GDP compared to the OECD average of 0.46. And Ibu Wendy reminded us that the mortgage debt remains as low as 5.1% of GDP. So it will require a number of reforms to really bring in the private sector at scale. From a private sector perspective, Pak Joko, what are key reforms that you can think of? I mean, maybe you can give us some very specific examples on regulatory, financial, or institutional changes that you think are necessary?
Thank you. We have different data from this, but I will answer your question about GDP from KPR, from okay. I will answer, please. To ensure that property sector can grow in support of the 3 million homes program, it is essential to establish supportive policies, effective communication, and stakeholder relation, and the third, a conducive business environment. Through the implementation of this program, it is equally important to avoid fear, uncertainty, doubts, public controversy, and negative perception. Approximately 2 years ago, we launched the Propertyonomic Proposal Bill open for core pillar, the the establishment of independent housing institution, enabling policy framework, adequate budgeting, and the designation of the 3 million homes program as a national strategic project. In terms of policy, we call for regulatory relaxation, simplification, and harmonization so that policies are supportive, integrative, and aligned with the broader housing ecosystem. At minimum, 4 key policy areas are needed to ensure the program success: land policy, permitting policy, oversight and supervision policy, and the last, policies that foster business conducive. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Pak Joko. So some very specific reforms that are clearly prioritized by the private sector that you're suggesting.
Yes.
Very good. I would suggest that we switch gears a little bit now and go back to Pak Abdul. You mentioned earlier the need for integrated infrastructure investments, particularly in metro and urban areas, right? And that requires moving away from a sector-siloed approach to more cross-sectoral integrated solutions. Given that right now we have a very sector-focused approach in the government, what can Indonesia do to promote more integrated infrastructure investments? Maybe any institutional changes or any innovations that you can think of that would be necessary to enable a more cross-sectoral approach?
Thank you. First, Bappenas focus right now in agglomeration area. We have several pipeline projects, transportation, sewerage, solid waste, water, that include foreign loan, PPP project, that we can combine it to improve some area and bring part of the housing program is a part of the key planning, because at the end we need to find where is the area we improve or we build a new things, and that's local strategy need to be engaged. And then how to promote the local business, local industry, local construction industry, and local developer, and financial inclusive to the local people. So if we want to arrange right now, we work hard. I think the strategy will be issued hopefully in the next 6 months and ready to test as a pilot project for that agglomeration area. And the second area we want to focus is in the rural development. Actually, in the rural development, we have now the food estate program, the many program for the farmer, for the rural area, and they are not yet financially inclusive for this rural area. For instance, there's a microcredit, but actually the microcredit is expensive, and even for the farmer agriculture credit, not yet succeed. So we want to focus on that specific target, that farmer rural population, how they can be financially inclusive, and included how they can improve the built house, their own housing over there, and to make the new job for them in the construction industry. Because in the fact, many constructor workers, even in Jakarta, they come from the rural area. So how to decentralize this program into some typical case of the area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Abdul. I want to stay a little bit on the topic of integrated infrastructure investments, and transit-oriented development is obviously one of the ways to achieve that. I know, Ibu Wendy, that you are an enthusiast of TOD, transport-oriented development. Can you tell us, do you think Indonesia is ready to scale up TOD solutions, and what would it take to do so through the housing improvement program?
I am your knight in shining armor when it comes to TOD development. Okay, so yes, I'm definitely an enthusiast. Now, TOD is like a buzzword. Everybody wants to say TOD. Anything is TOD infused at this point in time. Now, it started because of our public transportation plan. Then we start talking about stations. Then it becomes TOD. The criteria of what becomes TOD is kind of a blur right now. The regulation is out, but TOD should actually be a catalyst for the urban redevelopment of Jakarta. It should create jobs. It should have economic growth. It should have a seamless connection and integration of all the people who are living around it. You mentioned about public and private sector. Now, we work together with the city of Jakarta, 10 years now in the making, of creating a TOD, what is supposedly a TOD. A lot of hindrance and policy interventions, again, needs to be done. However, we have managed to create an 800 meters radius for each of the station designated as a TOD. I believe we have about 6 right now, if I'm not mistaken. Normally, they're all in the Sudirman Tamrin area. Okay, about 6 right now. Within this 800 meters radius, you have all the incentives and better policies for development in the area, whether it's private, whether it's public. Now, Bapa, you mentioned social housing. The best way to do it is actually within these areas, okay? Because the private sector right now is facing a double-edged sword when it comes to TOD development. The moment it is launched as a TOD, the land price goes up. The moment the land price goes up, all the units being developed in this area automatically goes up. Okay, so it's like a double-edged sword. The government has also given incentive for the residential developers within the 800 meters to get a plot ratio of 11. Now, 11 is very high. Okay, at the moment, we're probably looking at about 6 or 5 within the city. So 11 is extremely high. So you're talking about high-rise developments for residential within 800 meters. Okay? Let's not talk about whether or not it's feasible financially or it's doable. But the government had actually initiated, let's do plot ratio 11 to incentivize the private developer to want to build private housings over there. So there are more or less joint work in order to refine this TOD concept between the public and private sector. There's still a long way to go. As you can tell, we have not even connect any of the stations to the private buildings as of now. Okay, so that job is actually still in the making because the regulations and policies that becomes a hindrance in that.
So another area, important area for policy reforms as well. Very good. All right, before I give the word to Pak Fahri for the closing, because we're coming to the end of the panel session, I do want to touch on one very important topic, which is the resilience in the housing sector, right? I mean, as we know, Indonesia is very exposed to disasters. We heard about the fences on the cliff instead of the ambulances on the bottom of the cliff. In the past decade, 7.1 million Indonesian homes have been affected by disasters, 86% of those by floods. And I want to put this question to Pak Joko because it will require, again, very important involvement of the private sector with a challenge to balance achieving resilient standards, be compliant with resilient standards, at the same time making homes and houses more affordable. That's a very difficult balance to achieve. What's your view, Pak Joko? Is this achievable? What's the private sector role here, and what are your thoughts?
Developer build home and residential area in accordance with the government regulation. Before construction and selling home to consumer, we are required to obtain several permits, including those related to special planning, such as location permits, special sustainable certificate, KKPR, and site plan. This means we do not build in areas that are not permitted under zoning regulation in spatial plan. Prior to construction, we must also secure environmental permits, whether in the form of SPPL, UKLUPL, or AMDAL. Likewise, building construction must obtain a building permit, EMB, or a building approval, PBG. And it is feasibility must be verified through the certificate of proper function, SLF. Therefore, we do not receive the necessary permit from the government. We will not proceed with the building or selling homes to the public. This highlights that the key to safe housing development lies in government policies on spatial planning and permitting. It is crucial that areas prone to natural disaster are not authorized or approved for residential development. We also need transitional housing, multi-purpose residential building in each city, especially in disaster-prone areas. For contingency such as natural disaster, slum area revitalization, or when existing buildings that have become structurally obsolete. Thank you.
Thanks, Pak Joko. Very strong commitment. They're very glad to hear this. Very good. Pak Fari, coming back to you as we are closing the panel discussion. You have heard lots of different views and ideas on investment needs, on policy reforms that are needed. I think the audience, the country is very energetic, very optimistic about the 3 million housing program. What are your final thoughts? How can we move forward together with all the different involved stakeholders, Ministry of Finance, the Central Bank, line ministries, governors, mayors, SOEs, private sector, lots of stakeholders, very complex landscape there. Your final thoughts to close the event, Vice Minister, please.
Yeah, I think we need to be very serious in redesign of the whole policies that we need to have regarding the conducting the social housing for the people. Because as far as I understand, I'm basically new in these sectors because more before I'm involving in politics and judicial commission in the parliament. But the way I see it, there never been a serious design of policies that tackle the very issues of the housing. Let's take, for example, in the supply side, we never seriously tackle the issue of land, So it seems like the land issue, you just give it to the market. And I'm giving some criticize on the current policies, as I said to you, I'm sometimes more like the opposition to the government. I'm already inside of the government, but sometimes my opposition idea cannot go on from my mind, So, for example, comparing the policies of, subsidy, the monthly rent or budget to the land subsidy. I think land subsidy will give us more solid policies regarding the urban planning and city plannings, because that will give the control of where you build the house using the land from the government to achieve the demand of the government to start, the city building, the urban development. So, for example, insisting the vertical housing in the city, for example, that will be giving us a strong power not to allow the slum areas, I just get the video, short video from the Attorney General, Bapak Burhanuddin, which said that, from now on, we will remove all the, the houses from the riverside. And it is, very strong. That is what we need to do. So supply side will, will make sure that there is a cheap land, even free land for every construction company to build, the houses. And then, as Ibu from Australia just said, we already achieve our solving the problem of the food, solving the problem of the clothing. Now we need to solve the problem of the housing by having the institution like Bulog, the logistic state-owned company. So if the Ministry of Agriculture said, oh, now we have an oversupply of rice, 4 million tons per year, why not talking about oversupply of the housing? We never have an oversupply of housing. There's 10 million people on a queue to get the housing. So why not the government keeping pushing the demand, the supply side by providing the land, and then the people will just building the land, and then in the supply side, we need to have the offtake company. This is what we are now talking with Danantara. Because we want to move this like Perumnas and another state-owned company to becoming the off-taker. You just buy it from the developer, and then the people on the queue. That would be solved the problem of the social housing in the future of Indonesia. If not, it's nonsense. You are going nowhere basically. Just every year backlog 10 million, backlog 11 million, just like that. And then you celebrate that numbers without taking a very serious policies. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks, Pak Fari. So I'm certainly walking away from this discussion with my glass half full. I think there's a strong commitment from the private sector, from the public sector. The foundations in the country are very strong. I think we had a lot of recommendations on both on the investment side and on policy reforms, more of it in the report. I encourage you to scan the code and download and read the report. I would like you to join me in giving a very strong applause for the panel. I want to thank the panelists and thank the audience for your attention, and I'll give it back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Bjorn and distinguished panelists. I hope our panelists and also Pak Bjorn could remain on stage. Before we officially conclude our insightful panel discussion, we would like to express our gratitude to distinguished panelists. I would like to invite the World Bank Country Director, Ibu Carrie, to please join us on stage for a token of appreciation and a group photo. Ibu Carrie, please present the placard to Bapak Fahri Hamzah, Vice Minister of Housing and Settlement, Ministry of Housing and Settlement. Bapak Abdul Malik Sadat Idris, Deputy of Infrastructure, Bappenas. Bapak Joko Suranto, Chairman of Indonesia Real Estate Association. And Ibu Wendy Haryanto, Executive Director of Jakarta Property Institute. Now we will proceed to the group photo session. May I kindly ask everyone on stage to prepare for the photo? Bapak dan Ibu in the audience, we appreciate your patience as we take this moment to capture today's event. Thank you very much, Ibu Carrie, Bapak Bjorn, and our esteemed panelists. You may now return to your seats. Dear ladies and gentlemen, Bapak dan Ibu, the panel discussion marks the end of the IEP launch today. We encourage you to take a look at the full IEP report, which can be downloaded on worldbank.org/IEP. The details are up on the screen. You could also just take out your phone and scan the QR code on the screen, and you will be directed to our reports page. For the latest information on World Bank programs, reports, and other activities, please follow our X account @Bank Dunia. My name is Enda, and on behalf of the World Bank team, I would like to thank everyone here and online for your participation. We hope you have had a good time today, and we surely hope to see you again at future World Bank events, especially the next Indonesia Economic Prospects in 6 months. Terima kasih banyak dan sampai jumpa lagi. Goodbye for now.